picture this. It is the middle of the night in rural 1940s Bengal.
Mm-hmm.
Two elderly, completely destitute widows are standing out in moonlight outside this small thatched roof home.
Right.
And, society expects these women to be invisible. Like they're supposed to be living on the absolute margins, right? Just surviving on scraps, keeping their heads down.
I agree, yeah.
But tonight, they are gripping heavy, curved iron machetes.
It's quite the image.
It really is. And they are staring down the local police and this group of hired thugs, and they're just flatly threatening to chop the heads off of anyone who takes another step toward their front door.
Yeah.
So how do two completely disenfranchised widows get to the point where they're ready to wage, like, a literal war against the state and local corruption?
Yeah, that's the question.
Right. And that's what we're uncovering today in this deep dive. We're pulling from this really fascinating stack of sources. Our primary text is Manik Bandyopadhyay's legendary short story, Mashi-pishi, which translates to maternal aunt and paternal aunt.
Right.
But to really understand the mechanics of what these women pull off, we're also looking at historical records on the devastating Bengal famines, sociological research on the structural vulnerability of widows in colonial India, and, literary critiques that analyze his incredibly unique, almost clinical writing style.
It really is a clinical style, and that approach is entirely by design. I mean, we're looking at a narrative that completely dismantles those traditional tropes of victimhood.
Oh, for sure.
It takes a situation that, most writers would just drown in sentimentality and melodrama.
Right.
And instead, it treats survival as this matter of cold, hard economics and psychological endurance. Like, the author doesn't ask you to pity these women.
Right. He doesn't want your pity.
Exactly. He demands that you watch how they outmaneuver a system that is, designed to completely crush them.
Yeah, and I want to dig into that clinical approach right away because the origin of how this story even came to exist, it explains so much about the tone.
It really does.
So the author's real name was Prabodh Kumar Bandyopadhyay, though, history remembers him by his nickname Manik.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1928, Manik was not some, brooding poet sitting in a meadow writing romantic verses about the Bengali countryside.
No, not at all.
He was a Bachelor of Science student at the prestigious Presidency College in Kolkata.
Right.
And the story goes that he was sitting in the college canteen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just listening to his friends debate literature.
As college students do.
Yeah, exactly. And he simply makes a bet. He wagered that he, a hard science student, could write a story good enough to be published in one of the most prominent literary magazines of the time.
Which is such a bold move, but he followed through on that wager. He wrote a story called Atasi Mommy, and the response was just so overwhelming that it fundamentally altered the trajectory of his life.
Wow.
Yeah. He became this massive sensation practically overnight, and he eventually abandoned his formal scientific studies to become a full-time writer.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
he just dropped the science completely.
Well, yes and no. He abandoned the formal studies, but he never actually abandoned the scientific method. Right. He applied it to a completely new medium.
Okay. I struggle with that idea a little bit.
How so?
Well, a science student makes a bet, writes a hit story, and then becomes this literary icon known for dissecting human trauma.
Right.
But isn't there a massive contradiction there? Like when we think of science, we think of objectivity, right? Observable data, cold facts.
But sure.
But when we think of fiction that deals with rural human struggles, starvation and domestic abuse, we kind of expect a writer who leads with deep, sweeping empathy.
Yeah, you expect warmth.
Right. So how does a quote-unquote scientific mind write highly emotional fiction without it feeling like, I don't know, a sterile lab report?
Right. And what's fascinating here is that the brilliance of his method is that he views extreme human hardship as the ultimate pressure cooker.
Oh, interesting.
It's much like a petri dish in a laboratory, actually. He doesn't tell you how to feel about the characters. He places his subjects in an environment of extreme scarcity, famine, poverty, systemic violence, and he just objectively observes how they react.
So he just sets the conditions and watches them go.
Exactly. And historically, Bandyopadhyay was heavily involved with the Communist Party.
Oh.
And, just to be clear, whether you agree with that political ideology or not, we're not endorsing that here, but you can see how that specific lens became the absolute bedrock of his storytelling.
Right. It's just the historical context of his toolkit.
Exactly. He viewed the world entirely through the mechanics of class struggle and material wealth. He completely stripped away that romanticized veneer of village life that was, so popular in literature at the time.
Yeah, the idealized rural life.
Right. And he focused entirely on material reality. Like, what do these people actually eat?
Yeah.
Who holds the deed to the land? How are they generating income?
So the emotions in the story are a byproduct of the economics, not the other way around.
That is the core of his work. Yeah. Yes, he analyzes the mechanics of survival.
Okay, I know this story tackles some incredibly dark themes, but how does he actually invite the reader into this world? If he's completely rejecting those romanticized pastoral descriptions of a beautiful Bengali village, where do we actually start the narrative?
We start in the mud.
Ooh.
Literally, in the mud. The opening scene places us on a canal at low tide.
Okay.
And the water has receded, leaving behind this exposed, really visceral landscape. You're looking at thick mud, broken bricks, and heavy garbage that is usually hidden beneath the surface of the water.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a grueling, ugly environment. And in this mud, people are doing just intense physical labor. They're loading these massive bundles of straw onto these long, incredibly narrow wooden boats. They're called salties.
Salties, okay.
Right.
And this canal, this mud, this is where we meet our protagonists, Mashi and Pishi, the maternal aunt and the paternal aunt.
Yes.
And I imagine the introduction of two older traditional widows in 1940s India carries a very specific visual expectation for the reader, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sociological context of a widow at this time was one of extreme deprivation.
Right.
They were expected to wear plain white saris without any borders, shave their heads in many communities, and eat only one vegetarian meal a day.
Gosh.
And essentially just fade into the background of whatever household took them in. They were the ultimate dependents, just surviving on the charity of their male relatives.
Basically meant to be frail and invisible.
Completely invisible.
But that is absolutely not what he shows us on this canal.
Not at all. I mean, Mashi and Pishi are wearing thick, dirty white saris, yes. But there is nothing frail about them. They're standing at opposite ends of this narrow, salty boat.
Wow.
And they are physically plunging long bamboo poles into the thick mud, just sweating, straining, and steering this heavy vessel through the canal all by themselves.
That is some serious physical labor.
Yeah, they are entirely engaged in brutal physical commerce.
Yeah, huddled in the dead center of this boat between these two hardened older women is Lottie. And she is a young, plump-faced woman wearing this cheap patterned sari, and she is just visibly terrified. And the spatial arrangement there alone paints such a vivid picture.
It really does.
You know, you had these two hardened, sweating warriors on either end of the boat, and this soft, frightened girl in the middle. They're acting as a literal physical shield for her.
A shield she desperately needs because the threat materializes almost instantly in this scene.
Right.
A strong, rough-looking man named Kailash stops their boat.
Okay.
And he's acting as a proxy. He's delivering a message from Aladi's husband, a man named Jagu.
And it's not a friendly message.
No, it's an ultimatum. Jagu is demanding his wife back, and Kailash makes it very clear that if Mashi and Pishi refuse to hand her over, Jagu is going to file a lawsuit, leverage the police, and send the two old aunts to jail.
See, okay, why does a husband need to send a proxy to threaten two elderly women with legal action? Like, why wouldn't Jagu just show up himself and take her?
Because Jagu is relying on the weight of institutional power to do the intimidating for him.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Kailash uses the language of societal norms to frame this threat. He argues that, Aladi is a grown woman, the aunts have no men in their household to protect them, and therefore the husband has a fundamental legal and social right to his property, meaning his wife.
Right, he's completely weaponizing the patriarchal structure.
Exactly.
But Mashi and Pishi do not back down quietly.
No, they don't.
They don't just politely say no. They start shouting, detailing exactly why she isn't going back, for everyone on the canal to hear.
Yeah, they air all the dirty laundry.
Right. They list the absolute realities of Jagu's abuse.
Yeah.
They announce how he starved Aladi, kicked her, beat her with a broom, burned her, and tied her to a post. They drag the absolute worst of the private domestic sphere right out into the public light.
They completely refuse to let the violence remain a secret. By shouting it across the canal like that, they are breaking the social contract that says domestic abuse is a private family matter, and they expose the hypocrisy of the whole situation. They yell back at Kailash that, when Jagu used to visit their home, they treated him like royalty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were destitute, but they actually sold a goat, which is a massive, devastating financial loss for a poor family in this context.
Okay, it's huge.
Just to afford the ingredients to cook him 10 different delicacies. They gave him the full traditional worshipful welcome that a son-in-law expects.
So they played the game. They followed all the societal rules of respecting the husband, even when it literally bankrupted them.
They fulfilled their cultural obligation,
Yeah.
but they draw a hard boundary at murder.
Right.
They make it very clear they will feed him, but they will not send the girl back to be killed.
And there is a devastating detail woven into this public argument. There was an old man named Raman who was working on the canal, loading straw, and he overhears Mashi-pishi detailing this horrific abuse, and he just stops working. The text mentions him looking at Alati with tearful eyes. Why include this random bystander's reaction in the middle of such a tense confrontation?
Well, Rahman is essentially a walking ghost story.
Oh.
The narrative reveals that Rahman had a daughter of his own who was facing a very similar situation. She was terrified of her abusive in-laws, but Rahman, unlike Mashi-pishi, he bent to the societal pressure.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He followed the rules and he forced his daughter to return to her husband's home against her will because that is what society demanded of a father.
Wow.
And his daughter ended up dying from the abuse. So when Rahman looks at Alati, he is literally looking at the pale face of his own dead child.
So Raman is basically the ghost of what could be. He's a physical proof that Mashi-pishi are not exaggerating.
Right.
He is the fatal consequence of following the rules.
Yeah.
If these women get into the social pressure and the legal threats, Alati will become Raman's daughter.
Exactly. His silent, lingering grief completely validates the aunt's loud public rebellion.
Yeah.
And they also expose the real reason Jagu wants her back.
Right, the money.
Yes. It has nothing to do with marital reconciliation or love. Alati recently inherited a small piece of property from her deceased father, and Jagu simply wants to absorb that asset.
It's always about the property.
Always. Yeah. Under the inheritance laws prevalent at the time, particularly the Dayapaga system in Bengal, a woman's right to property was incredibly tenuous, and it was often controlled entirely by her husband.
So Jagu views Alati merely as the key to unlocking that land.
That's all she is to him.
It always comes down to the underlying economics. Mm-hmm. And that transitions us to the massive question of how these three women ended up in this specific, desperate situation. You mentioned Alati inherited property from a deceased father. What happened to the rest of the family?
So to understand their current reality, we really have to look at the historical trauma of Bengal in the 1940s. The region suffered catastrophic famines, and it is crucial to understand that these famines were not just the result of, a bad harvest.
Right, it wasn't just weather.
No, they were incredibly complex disasters driven by wartime inflation, hoarding, and massive systemic administrative failures.
Wow.
Food became impossibly expensive. And the text notes that Alati's father barely survived the famine, which means the whole family was subjected to prolonged, severe malnutrition.
And as is so often the case in history, when a population is weakened by starvation, disease follows immediately behind it.
Exactly. Cholera sweeps right through the village.
Gosh.
And cholera thrives in environments where infrastructure has collapsed and people are desperate. It rapidly dehydrates the body, and in a population that's already weakened by a massive famine, it is an absolute death sentence.
Yeah.
The epidemic wipes out Alati's father, her mother, and her brother. The entire nuclear family is erased in a matter of days.
That is just incomprehensible tragedy.
It is. Alati is the sole survivor of her bloodline, but she's trapped at her in-laws' house, enduring Jagu's torture.
Right.
Eventually, Jagu beats her so severely that she is sent back to her empty childhood home, essentially half dead.
And the only people left in that empty house are Mashi and Pishi?
Mm-hmm.
But from what I understand, they were not a united front. They were not waiting there as these, loving, supportive guardians.
Oh, definitely not. Before the plague wiped out the family, Mashi and Pishi were just two destitute widows who had sought shelter in Alati's father's house.
Okay.
And the environment inside that house was incredibly toxic.
Really?
Yeah, because during the height of the famine, the father had to prioritize his immediate family. He allowed the two aunts to sleep under the roof, but he cut off their food supply entirely.
Uh-huh. He just let them starve while the rest of the family ate?
Yes. They were left to fend for themselves while living inside a house where others were eating.
That level of artificial scarcity, that would breed absolute resentment. Yeah. I can't even imagine the psychological toll of being starved while watching your relatives survive just a few feet away.
Right, and it turned them against each other.
Oh, they fought each other.
Intensely. Pishi, being the father's sister, she felt this sense of entitlement. Like, it was her brother's house, so she felt she had a higher status.
Right, the paternal side.
Exactly. And Mashi was the mother's sister, so Pishi viewed her as this complete outsider just taking up space. The text describes their dynamic as vicious. They wouldn't just bicker. The tension was so high that they looked ready to physically attack each other.
Wow.
Banjo-Padhi specifically notes they looked ready to strike each other with a banti.
A banti. What's that?
It's a traditional heavy curved cutting blade used in Bengali kitchens. You sit on a wooden base and the blade curves upward. It's very sharp.
Okay, I have to push back on the timeline here. You have two women who are so traumatized by starvation and jealousy that they're literally threatening each other with kitchen blades.
Yes.
Then Aladi shows up, half dead. Do Mashi and Pishi just magically drop their blood feud overnight? Like, does instant solidarity really form that quickly after years of hatred?
I know, it might seem sudden if you view it purely through an emotional lens, but remember Bandyopadhyay's scientific approach to material conditions?
Right, the economics.
Yes. The feud between Mashi and Pishi was entirely based on competing for these tiny scraps of privilege at the very bottom of a hierarchy.
Right.
They were fighting over who got to be the least marginalized dependent in the father's house.
Right, right.
But when the father dies, the hierarchy completely collapses. There is no one left to provide for them and no one left to oppress them.
So the whole structure is gone.
It's gone. When Aladi arrives, the dynamic shifts from a desperate competition for resources to a shared, urgent purpose. They are suddenly the matriarchs of an empty house, and the last surviving piece of their shared family tree is bleeding out on the floor.
Oh, wow. So the trauma just forces a total realignment of their priorities.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, they realize the feud was a luxury they could only afford when someone else was responsible for the household.
That's such an interesting way to put it. A luxury.
Yeah, with the patriarch gone, they have to pivot to pure survival. The text says they became one mind, one soul.
Oh, I love that.
They pool their sheer willpower, they nurse Aladi back to health, and somehow they manage to scrounge for food to keep her alive while people in the village around them are literally dropping dead.
So they nurse her back to health. They create this incredible emotional bond. But, emotional support does not buy rice.
No, it doesn't.
And it certainly doesn't keep a violent husband or local thugs away. How do two women who have absolutely nothing, who were just starving a few weeks prior, suddenly acquire a boat and the leverage to fight back?
Right, and this is where the narrative shifts from a story of emotional resilience to just an absolute masterclass in grassroots economics.
Okay, walk me through this.
So Mashi understands that to protect Aladi, they need capital. Without money, they are completely defenseless. She observes the local economy, and she notices an arbitrage opportunity.
Really? Like she finds a market gap?
Exactly. She realizes that vegetables and fruits fetch significantly higher cash prices in the distant city markets compared to what they sell for locally in the village.
Okay. But getting the goods to the city is the bottleneck, right? It requires grueling physical labor to row a heavy wooden boat miles down a canal. One elderly woman couldn't possibly manage the logistics or the physical toll alone.
Precisely. So she pitches a partnership to Pishi.
Okay.
And Pishi's reaction is brilliantly pragmatic. She doesn't agree just out of some newfound sisterhood. She realizes that if she refuses, Mashi might find another partner in the village.
Oh.
And Pishi will be entirely cut out of the profits.
Oh, so it's a business decision.
Completely. So they form a cartel of two.
I love that. They built a micromonopoly.
They really do. They walk around the village collecting surplus produce from poor farmers who can't make the trip to the city themselves, and they even negotiate to buy bulk produce from wealthy garden owners.
So they become the middlemen.
Exactly. They load it all onto their salty, they do the grueling physical labor of rowing it to the urban market, and they sell it for a cash profit. They basically insert themselves as the central supply chain between the rural farmers and the urban buyers.
The radical nature of this economic shift, it cannot be overstated. We discussed earlier what widows were expected to do, right?
Yeah.
Husk rice, forage for weeds, beg for charity.
Exactly.
By taking command of a boat, which is, a significant piece of commercial machinery, and entering the cutthroat environment of the city market, they seize total financial agency.
Yes, they generate their own capital, and that capital is the direct mechanism that funds their independence.
It is so rare to see economic leverage used as the primary weapon in literature from this era. Usually a protagonist relies on, I don't know, a sudden inheritance or a male savior or just sheer moral superiority to win the day.
Right, moral victories.
But Mashi-pishi figure out that moral superiority doesn't build a fortress. Cash does.
Cash does. And they need a fortress because the threat is omnipresent. While the ants are building this business, they refuse to leave Aladi alone in the house. They know the village is not safe.
And the psychological toll on Aladi during all of this is immense, right?
Oh, absolutely crushing.
Because she isn't just sitting passively on the boat. She's drowning in guilt. She feels responsible for the backbreaking labor these two older women are enduring just to keep her fed.
Yeah, she feels like a burden.
But more disturbingly, the text highlights how degraded she feels by the environment itself. She uses the word gutter to describe how she feels.
Right.
Because she sees the way the local men look at her.
Because she is separated from her husband, the societal safety net, however toxic it may have been, is gone. The local men view her as unattached, vulnerable property.
There's a specific character, a wealthy, corrupt local man named Gokul.
Yes.
Gokul and men like him literally try to negotiate with Mashi and Pishi to buy Aladi.
It's repulsive.
They treat her exactly like the bundles of vegetables they sell at the market.
Yeah.
Aladi is so crushed by this constant predatory commodification that she sometimes thinks it would have been easier to just endure Jagu's beatings.
Yeah.
At least then her aunts wouldn't be suffering this endless harassment.
But the genius of the ants' economic strategy is that it provides a shield against this exact predation. Because Mashi and Pishi generate their own income, they possess the power of refusal.
They can say no.
Exactly. They don't owe Gokul anything. They aren't reliant on his charity or his loans. Capital allows them to look a wealthy, corrupt man right in the eye and say no.
But corrupt power doesn't usually just walk away when you say no, right? Men like Gokul, men who are used to getting whatever they want, they tend to escalate when they are denied.
Which brings us to the climax of the story, the ultimate stress test of their fortress.
The atmosphere of this scene is just incredibly tense. It's nighttime. The text notes it's a bright moonlit night, and the ants are physically depleted.
Extremely depleted, yeah.
Because they spent the entire previous day fasting for religious reasons. They are exhausted, resting in their home, when Kanai, the village watchman, suddenly shows up at their door. And Kanai brought back up. He has 3 peons with him and a hired thug wearing a red turban.
It is the classic deployment of state authority mixed with brute force.
Yeah.
Kanai tells the women that the Daroga, the local police inspector, along with Gokul, are demanding the aunts come to local office immediately.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. Kanai lays down the threat. If they don't come willingly, they will be dragged there by force.
See, why the midnight summons? Why doesn't the police inspector just come to the house in broad daylight and arrest them if he actually has the authority?
Well, because the authority is a total facade.
Right.
Gokul and the police inspector know they don't have a legitimate legal reason to arrest the ants or to take the girl. Doing it in broad daylight would draw the attention of the entire village and potentially higher authorities.
That makes sense.
Corrupt power operates best in the shadows, right? Using intimidation to force the victims to isolate themselves. They want the ants to leave the safety of their home so they can be coerced privately.
But Mashi and Pishi are incredibly street smart. They don't panic, and they don't blindly trust the uniform.
Not at all.
In the moonlight, they notice movement near a jackfruit tree outside their home. They spot 3 local thugs, Sadhu, Baija, and Osman, hiding in the shadows.
Which is a terrifying realization.
Instantly, the mechanics of the trap become clear to them. The watchmen and the police summons are just decoys. The goal is to get the 2 fierce guard dogs out of the house, leaving Aladi alone so the thugs in the bushes can just drag her away to Gokul or Jagu.
Their situational awareness is astounding. They process the deception and formulate a counteroffensive in a matter of seconds.
They use this brilliant tactic of fake compliance. They calmly tell the watchman, oh, give us a moment to change our clothes and wash our hands before we go to the office.
Right, they play along.
They step back into the shadows of their house. And the men outside assume they have won. But when Mashi and Pishi step back out into the moonlight, they haven't changed their clothes.
No.
Mashi is gripping her banti, the heavy kitchen blade. And Pishi is holding a ramda, which is a massive, heavy machete used for chopping thick wood and bone.
They completely subvert the expectation of the vulnerable widow.
They walk out armed for medieval combat.
They really do.
Mashi grits her teeth, raises the iron blade, and tells the watchmen and the thugs to take one step closer. She promises to chop their heads clean off, Pishi steps up right beside her, raising the machete, echoing the exact same promise.
The sheer shock value of this moment is profound. These men came expecting tears, begging or quiet submission to authority.
Right.
And instead, they find themselves staring down two feral warriors who are fully prepared to commit murder.
But the weapons are only half of the strategy. What they do next is a stroke of tactical genius. Without exchanging a single word, without even looking at each other, Mashi and Pishi simultaneously unleash a massive, calculated roar.
Yes.
They scream at the absolute top of their lungs into the quiet night. But they aren't just screaming for help in a generic way.
And that distinction is crucial.
Yeah.
Generic cries for help often trigger the bystander effect, where everyone assumes someone else will intervene so no one does.
Right, everyone just stays in bed.
Exactly. But they shatter the bystander effect by screaming specific names. Baba the Koi, Gosh Moshe, Janardin. They call out to their neighbors by name, demanding they wake up.
The psychological impact is immediate. The village erupts. Windows fly open. Voices shout back through the darkness. The entire community wakes up and begins cursing Gokul and the police inspector.
By weaponizing the community's attention, they completely strip away the cover of darkness that Gokul was relying on.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
They force the neighborhood to bear witness. And the moment the anonymity is broken, the thugs and the watchmen panic. They scatter into the night, abandoning the siege entirely.
It is an incredible victory. They faced down an alliance of state police, wealthy elites, and hired thugs, and they won without swinging a single blade.
But the story doesn't end with a triumphant high five.
No.
The aftermath explores the chilling reality of what it actually costs to maintain this level of defiance, because winning a skirmish does not dismantle the corrupt system.
Right. The threat is still out there.
The threat remains.
As the adrenaline fades and the village goes back to sleep, the night gets eerily quiet again. Mashi and Pishi go back inside and lie down on the bed, placing Aladi safely between them. And they're vibrating with this new strength, realizing the actual weight of their own political power in the village. But neither of them can sleep. Mashi whispers into the dark that she has a terrible feeling the men are going to come back tonight.
And Pishi's memory provides the historical precedent for that fear.
Right.
She recalls a story from the past where a family defied the local power brokers by trying to hide a young girl. And in retaliation, thugs sneaked onto the property in the middle of the night and set fire to the family's thatched roof.
If corrupt men cannot have the girl, they will burn the house to the ground to punish the women who embarrass them.
Exactly. It's the ultimate scorched earth tactic.
So they have to transition immediately from the high of the confrontation back to the cold, logistical reality of defense.
Yeah, they slip out of bed silently, making sure they don't wake the sleeping Aladi. And they begin fortifying their home against a firebombing. They take their thick winter quilts, the kaffa, and old heavy blankets, and they plunge them into large tubs of water.
Getting them soaking wet.
Exactly. They let the heavy fabric soak completely through, preparing to use them to smother any torches thrown onto the roof.
Wow.
And they haul heavy pots and pitchers of extra water from the pond, lining them up strategically inside the house. And finally, they place the Bonti and the machete right next to their pillows.
That final sequence brings the entire thematic weight of Bandyupadhyay's story into focus.
Yeah.
They have transformed the domestic space into a military bunker.
They really have. Think about the materials they're utilizing.
Right, water pots.
Water pots, sleeping quilts, kitchen blades.
Yeah.
The very objects that traditionally symbolize a woman's domestic servitude and her confinement to the home, they have been aggressively repurposed into the instruments of her defense.
It is a phenomenal piece of literature, because it forces you to rethink the mechanics of power. Mashi-pishi demonstrates that true safety in a corrupt, patriarchal world cannot be achieved by just following the rules or appealing to morality.
Yeah.
These two widows prove that survival requires economic leverage, relentless situational awareness, and the absolute willingness to bare your teeth.
They completely rejected the script that society wrote for them. They refused to be victims, they refused to be invisible, and by doing so, they secured the survival of their family.
The imagery of that final scene is going to stick with me for a long time.
Me too.
And we want to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought to explore on your own today. Throughout history, we've been conditioned to view the domestic sphere, the spaces of cooking, sewing, and maintaining the home, as spaces of passivity and softness. But what if we completely flipped that perspective? What if we started viewing these everyday domestic skills and tools not as symbols of subjugation, but as a sleeper arsenal? If the world suddenly turned on you tonight, How many ordinary things sitting in your own kitchen or bedroom could you repurpose to fight back? Until next time, keep diving deep.